Hello and welcome to another episode of Hydra's Den. I'm your host, Hydra, and today I am joined by Albert.
Hello, everyone.
Uh, And today we are going to be talking about RP encounters and how to handle NPCs. So I'm just going to switch this over to a nice little slideshow scenery, and let's begin. First thing to really go over is what exactly an NPC is, because some people coming into this might not know. An NPC refers to a non-player character. It's everyone who's not one of the players in your game, because every character that one of the players isn't playing, you're going to have to play, and so every NPC you're going to have to give the voice and the sort of personality to. It's the probably one of the most vital roles of the DM to sort of, other than story crafting itself, because this is going to be where the lifeblood of your story comes from. Everybody that the players interact with, and a lot of people don't really know where to start. So I got a request to do this. That's why we're handling it. So to start, Owlbear, you've also handled a few sessions yourself, right?
Yeah, uh, I've had a few with my group of doing just roleplay sessions that went over pretty well without anyone wanting to leave the table prematurely because they weren't being immediately encouraged to stay with combat or adventuring. It's just been straight up dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an excellent point there. Effectively, I guess you could view it as there's sort of this holy trifecta of different topics that people are going to get into in their standard tabletop game. One of them is going to be exploring, one of them is going to be combat, and one of them is going to be interacting with the NPCs. So, yeah, it's a vital one. So I guess the first thing to go over would be that when, like, the first and most important thing when you're writing an NPC or you're playing an NPC is that your NPC needs to be, I'm going to call it organic. But what I'm trying to say is that NPCs need to feel like real people. Whether that's your gruff tavern owner, whether that's your valorous knight, or the just regular bum of a city guard. Every character is going to have their own thoughts, their own personality, and that's going to sound really complicated for new DMs. It's like where do you even start with that? But honestly, the easiest place to start is just give them a little bit of motivation and then just kind of roll from there. Like, considering, just always be considering their perspective if you're playing them, and have them react to the players.
Yeah, I think an important takeaway when designing an NPC or an NPC encounter is definitely try to make the NPC seem like they just popped out of the ground for the sake of that specific conversation, but to kind of, like Hydra said, have them be a bit more organic. So have them like they've lived in this world their entire lives, assuming this is a single plane world. But that being said, it's important to remember that these NPCs have lives, interests, values. They're basically they're people. They're living creatures with every single characteristic that a player's character and also a player would have. So having them be that that you walk up to them and they say press B to jump, and then they just repeat single lines over and over,
Yeah.
can really break the immersion.
Yeah. So a really good way to go with that, for just a good start, if you don't really know where you're going, is and this is honestly one of my favorite things to do, is very often when players start out, they're not going to really know what they're doing. Everyone's not going to know what they're doing. You're not going to know. The players aren't going to know. So when you have your first little bit of whether it's the first tavern, or if you're whatever sort of situation you're in, whether you're at the back of a wagon trying to make it across a border or anything else, have your, like, typically I'd say let the players lead a little bit, unless you're going for the sort of start where the NPC is going to lay out their quest. Let the players start a little bit and then have the NPCs react. So when if you give the players just a little bit of time to sort of feel that this world is more reactive, it definitely encourages them to, I don't know, interact back, if that makes sense. If you follow what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
they need to break in the shoes of role playing, especially if they're new to the table, because I don't think I've met a single person who's ever kind of sat down at the table and immediately fit into the character. There's definitely a lot of wiggle room where they have to adjust to getting used to talking through their character to the DM, who is also talking through another character.
Yeah.
There's definitely a little bit of a curve.
Yeah, and that being said, don't be afraid early on to have some fun with your NPCs. A lot of people, when they start out, they'll make the most generic medieval villagers around. But you could totally have one of the first NPCs that they meet be, Crazy Fred, the village drunkard, who, talks in a slur and, laughs at random, not funny things and picks fights with people. Just like a character who's just completely absurd, but actually is very, I guess, very reactive. If you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Oh,
if that's somebody who's not sitting there waiting for the players to interact with them, but isn't an NPC that's afraid to just kind of interact with the players, or even NPCs interacting with NPCs, can be a very weird sensation of the DM talking to themselves, especially if they aren't comfortable or familiar with kind of assigning voices to NPCs.
yeah,
You can get lost a little bit.
yeah. So, I mean, to be honest, a lot of DMs that get into that really well are going to be the acting types. But even if you aren't, the most important thing is that like NPCs talking to NPCs is actually a really important part of it. And while your players may not always like being sidelined, the unfortunate truth is that sometimes they will have to, because otherwise, if every conversation has them at the center of it, it just sometimes feels a little weird.
Yeah, it feels like the world has no depth. That the entire world is only changing upon the players interacting with it.
Yeah, precisely. It's kind of this weird sort of inverse of what you'll see a lot in role playing video games and stuff like that, where a lot of like sort of on the worst end of RPGs, all the NPCs interact with each other, but the players just are kind of these faceless voids. So all the NPCs get all the character, and they just then the players forever sidelined. The other side of it is in tabletops like Dungeons and Dragons, where the NPCs are all sidelined, and the players are the only real characters. Yeah, so making NPCs that other people, other characters react to, is just as important as making NPCs that react to the players themselves.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So one tip I will give though, for people who if you want more specifics on how to deal with your first multi NPC encounters, would be the first thing that I really like to do is start with one NPC that has a particularly strong personality and one NPC that has a particularly sort of submissive one. One of my favorite pair that I've been working with recently is a pair of explorers, where you have one that they have the one is very go getting, very takes the lead on everything, whereas the other one is very book smart and studies a lot, but he's sort of being dragged along right for the ride. And
Yeah.
they play off each other really nicely because one sort of brings out the other's personality.
Yeah, that's a very useful and standard kind of character cliche.
Yeah,
You can see it in a lot of things. Like they do that in Harry Potter. They do that in all kinds of settings where you have the one book smart, awkward, and the Chad who's just ready to dive in head first at the drop of a hat.
yeah, exactly. And I mean that actually goes back to old comedy routines too. It's the straight man and the funny man. You got
Yep.
the one who's always cracking jokes and bringing the other one out, and the straight man is the one who plays off the jokes. They're the punchline to it. So playing those, like looking at traditional sort of like sketches and stuff like that, typically what you'll find is that if you're running more than one NPC, one of them basically takes the lead, and they're the one who does most of the talking. Like the other one will be there, but their usual job is to kind of play off your main NPC, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and just basically this for people that don't maybe, it's the other NPCs. If you're having a hard time making several strong NPCs in the scene, then focus on one and have the others effectively play off that one. If and by that could be something like the captain of the guard makes his statement, and another like a scribe or something chimes in, or his squire chimes in with some particular point that he then builds off of, and it effectively gives his dialogue. It allows you to get more of his dialogue out, but in a way that feels very natural and organic, so to speak.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would also like to add in there that if you have an NPC talking, and like I just suggested, having like the scribe or the squire chime in to kind of add to it or remind the captain of the guard of specific details, I find that can be a really important detail, is remembering that not every NPC knows everything that's going on,
Yeah.
and distinguishing what should the because I've watched others DM, and their players will walk into a new town, and they'll only be in the second or third level, so they haven't really made a name for themselves in the world, but everybody already recognizes them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, hey, we know you guys." Like they act as if they were in the same town the players were just in,
Oh yeah.
even though they haven't traveled previously. So remembering that non-heroic tier or second or third tier characters aren't going to be well known in the world, and
You cut out.
force that.
You cut out a little.
Well, I was just saying the NPCs should definitely be the ones that help kind of well, the NPCs really are what determines how much notoriety players have in the world, even though they might be doing huge actions like slaying dragons and taking down evil sorcerers. Unless NPCs are talking about it, there's basically no one's in the world.
Oh
So notoriety is definitely associated with how the NPCs work.
yeah, and to build on that, don't be afraid to have an NPC that's abusive to the players. Like NPCs, if the players haven't really made a name for themselves but are acting like they have, NPCs can be dismissive of them. Even like you can have amusing encounters where the players come back from killing a dragon, but nobody really takes them seriously in the next village over because, yeah, right, these couple of guys just took down a dragon. Sure, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You can have that sort of situation, and that always can lead to it can really sort of stoke the players to try even harder to impress or can
To
make them.
prove their worth.
Yeah, exactly. It
To prove their worth. That's a major thing.
yeah, it prods them further. And of course, there's going to be key NPCs and like your DMPC, which will be your personal NPCs that you use as a kind of DM avatar in one form or another. These and the other important one would be the BBEG, the big bad evil guy. These ones might be handled a little bit differently, I'd say. Only because they're like players in my experience are very wary around DNPCs.
Yeah, I personally, as a DM, don't like the idea of DNPCs,
Yeah,
but they can be definitely useful, especially when players start to get they're a bit lost in the plot if they weren't paying too much attention at the table, or it's been a while since the last session and everyone has generally no idea what's going on. The DN
you cut out again.
the heels and kind of, oh, sorry about that. The DNPC is definitely kind of like the seeing eye dog that helps get the party along.
Yeah,
But they could serve any role. They could act as a plot device for sabotaging the party. It's really at the DM's discretion.
of course. Yeah, and what I would add to that is that in my experience, if the player sometimes you need a guide, as you so well put, the seeing eye dog for the party. The biggest problem, like the reason why the players are often very wary of DNPCs, is because there's always the worry that DNPCs are going to be overly strong. They're going to be a way for the DM to sort of bring themselves in their godlike power into the mortal form and then go around being the best ever. This is definitely something that as a DM you will have to be careful not to do, because it's at the end of the day, as much as it is your game that you're writing, it's not your game that you're playing. So even if your DMPC is like a hand-holding guide master, even if they're the one who reminds the players of the certain plot beats of the story, they can encourage players towards whatever plot you want, but the DMPCs should never be the one who decides it in my view. And more importantly, the DMPC should usually they can hold a certain vital role like healer or trap master or whatever. Well, I would say not so much disarming traps, but healer is a good example. But whatever role they hold, it should never outshine the players.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that doesn't exactly keep them on like the front, like if they're traveling with someone, that's one thing. If they're going from one town to another and they're kind of helping them get there, if they're going through a dangerous area. But that being said, the important distinction to make with DNPCs and
you're chopping.
Oh.
Yeah. You want to switch over to push to talk or something?
Give me one moment.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty. So while he fixes that, I'm just gonna quickly cover that. If anyone has any suggestions for new streams or any ideas, that they can feel free to check the comments. We've got check the description. We've got a link to the Discord where most of this stuff is hosted. We answer questions and stuff regularly there. Or check us out regularly on we play games through there, and we do go through we do the Twitch stuff, of course, but my main places I'm bringing this from is YouTube and from Discord. So you think
right.
you're back?
I should be a bit better now. I upped my mic sensitivity to pick up what I'm saying.
Yeah, so go ahead.
So the important distinction to make between DNPCs and NPCs that are just traveling with the party, I would have to say, is the duration for which they are actually with the party. So if you have a cleric or a guide working with the party, or even like a hireling, that because they need to get through a forest or a maze, and they need somebody with a certain set of skills, after their task has been finished for either the plot or they just drift apart due to not a for the DM to be able to just let
that last little bit cut.
Oh, sorry, not sure why it's cutting out, but more or less what I'm saying is the difference between DNPCs and NPCs is they shouldn't be around any longer than they need to be. So if they're there to serve a specific purpose as a healer or a guide or a tracker, after they've completed their task, they have a life to get back to.
Yeah,
and should
definitely
leave the party.
BBEGs, so big bad evil guys, on the other hand, to be honest, they are worth an entire stream to themselves, and I actually did do one previously. If we were going to go into more detail, I would say give them a strong character, make sure that the themes of the plot work around them, and don't have then they should be the one person above all others who does not put up with the player's shenanigans. You know what I mean? BBG is the one person who can be rude, sassy, insulting, just unpleasant to the players.
They're the NPCs that have the right to monologue.
Yeah, that too, of course. So from there, let's move into player versus player to player RP. Okay.
Yeah, I find this can be a particularly awkward spot, especially for newer players or players that aren't very strong with their roleplay skills. Mm-hmm. You having a person talk through themselves into a character that is talking to another character that is being played by somebody else can be a little bit confusing and a little bit awkward, I could say.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing I'm going to say straight off the bat that this is actually one of my weakest areas. Even after all the years I've been playing, I still get issues where players don't role play as much as I would like them to. But one thing I can say is the biggest, from my experience, is that the biggest cause of players not role playing at all. And to be honest, you may be the type of DM that doesn't mind if the players don't, but in my opinion, you're missing out on a very rewarding experience if you don't encourage role play between players. And the biggest thing that destroys player to player role play is out of character talking. Out of character talking would be anything where
side talk.
Yeah, side talk, anything where they're saying stuff just outside of character. Those sort of things may feel like little idle whatevers, but they add up over time. Especially when you're in a situation where you had maybe a 5-hour session. Those little side talks can start with a little bit of oh, maybe we could do this, oh, maybe we could do that, and they turn into entire sessions where, if you look at the actual in-game chat, the players talk to each other like in-game maybe twice.
Yeah, or several days of in-game traveling, and everyone's just kind of talking out of character. If you look at it, there's basically been nothing said for a week of travel. It can get a little bit frustrating on the DM side if it's a big thing that they're worried about.
Yeah. So I mean, in my experience, they're like on one angle, your players may not like to roleplay to each other, and while that's troublesome, you unfortunately have to accept that. But the best way, in my opinion, to reward and encourage it is to make it satisfying. Is to have, well, whether it's just other players or NPCs actually responding to it positively, or if you have to go the most obvious route and simply, okay, you guys get roleplay experience. Basically just give them, or whatever system you're running, if you give them some sort of actual reward or praise out of character for them, not drifting out of character.
Yeah, and 5th edition has something to that extent, actually. They have, okay. I believe it's called like a performance point or inspiration. You get an inspiration dice, which is kind of like bardic inspiration, but the DM can just kind of hand them out as rewards, and they can use those later. Or you could just go with the milestone kind of experience. But another option that I don't find gets used enough is creating bonds with NPCs can have lasting effects down the road. For example, if the players help out in a town that's been going through some strife and they successfully defeat whatever the problem was, not only should they get the experience for whatever encounters they had or a little bit of RP bonus, but they now have a bond with the town that they were in. As soon as they leave the area, kind of to use video game reasoning, the town doesn't just despawn. It's still going to be there. It's still going to be a living, breathing town. There's people moving in and out and markets bustling.
Yeah, totally.
That needs to be kept in mind, I think, because later down the road, if your players forget, because they get to a higher level, but in times of need, players can sometimes go back to those bonds they made with NPCs that they helped earlier in their story. And that's, I think, a really useful bit of plot or a bit of history that the players can bring to their advantage when they're either reminded or remember.
Oh yeah, totally. And actually, a nice other way you can do is one of my favorite things to do sometimes is have NPCs appear, things like fellow adventurers who are from that town they saved. If there's like a sizable amount of time that's passed, people like other people from that area, even if it's just merchants or whatever, can like basically spread the rumor or encounter them later and either like offer them a drink or give them aid just because of the remembering the good deeds that they did earlier. And although this is, to be honest, more player to NPC interactions, it still is just as important in my opinion. Like, because the player to player, of course, isn't as easy to encourage, but player to NPC, if you can get player to NPC stuff going, that's honestly a perfect first step to getting player to player. Because once the NPCs start interacting, and if an NPC gets talked to a bit and starts asking them questions, you'll force discussions.
Yep, I would agree with that. And also, when you have multi-person conversations, it's not always going to be one player to one NPC, but it could be the party to a group of villagers or a group of guards or a group of soldiers, and there's going to be banter back and forth in roleplay between the NPCs talking to the party, and likewise with the party talking between each other while in the presence of another party of NPCs, can making it more of an organic and natural flowing conversation, as opposed to my character says X, or like prefacing what they're saying with that can take them out of character.
Yeah.
But knowing when to recognize when they're just speaking, but you can tell that they're in character when they're doing it without the use of like voices or mannerisms. It's they just speak, but you know that they're talking in character.
Yeah. A good way I usually do to keep people in character is try to keep everything they say as in character. With the exception being if you need to send something out of character, send me a message or whatever. Or just specify that it's out of character. Like even just the default assumption that they're in character does help, in my opinion.
Yeah, like when asking for clarification, like if you're mid conversation and then you go, you just see like DM, or you have like a phrase word that kind of takes you out of character. It's like what were their uniforms? What did they look like? What were they equipped with? What
Yeah,
was their body posture? Because there's only so much you can convey via conversation
of course.
without picking up physical cues. That's something that you as a DM and also players need to get more comfortable with. Is when a situation is getting more tense, you can say the guards slowly move their hands towards their swords, or they're like they get more twitchy, they look unnerved, they're kind of shifting their weight more.
Yeah,
Indicators that the conversation tone is changing without them talking differently. So
yeah.
using body language.
That's always good. And speaking of physicality, I'd like to actually move on to our sort of last topic here, which is construction of your RP encounters. And specifically, what I wanted to cover here, we've been talking about this outside the stream, and we're thinking of maybe moving on to a bit more details on, world building, town building, and how this is going to affect your NPCs. And honestly, there's so much material here. That's for another session entirely. If people like this idea, just let me know. But the one thing that I'd like to sort of like the last topic here is that the way NPCs act should be relative to where they are. And what I mean by this is the guards who are in a small little village that never sees any crime or monster attacks typically are going to be much slower to get riled up. They're going to be much more, bored with their life. Whereas guards in a very high intensity combat zone are going to be very quick to anger. They're going to be quicker to take up arms.
Yep.
This is basically what I'm saying is that your situation that your character's in will dramatically affect how they act to different things. Does that make sense?
Yep. So what I would add to along that front is not only is there are the way NPCs act relative to where they are, I think it also is a lot of how their upbringing was. So you'll be a player or as the DM
You cut
when
out there.
players and tell when someone doesn't fit in a situation. So if you're in you're just traveling the countryside and you're in a tavern and you see a man who has abnormal clothing to the rest of the room, you'll be able to tell that he's going to act differently. He isn't going to be talking like all of the villagers. Like he could be an envoy for a guild of a large city traveling to another large city. So they're going to talk differently than the people of the area. And that's a really useful thing to kind of keep players on their toes, is when something is out of place, but it's not necessarily there as a trick or a trap. It's reminding the players that things do go on without them, that they still have the opportunity to interact with.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. Is that because the world will dynamically move around people, sometimes just taking a little bit of time between sessions and just considering either A, the implication of your player's actions, or B, how other events are happening in the distance and how these two things will affect NPCs are great ways for both world building and flavoring your NPCs. Because if the players kill a dragon and its corpse ends up polluting a stream that everyone uses for water, people are going to be a lot more sickly, and they're probably going to be a lot quicker to just anger and look for help.
Yeah, they could also see it as it's a curse for the players killing the dragon, even though the simple truth is the dragon's death tainted the river for blood or whatever
Yeah.
essence went to the water. But players aren't, or NPCs aren't going to be the brightest, especially when you're dealing with very small towns, with very rural and agriculturally focused societies. They're not going to think of nuance, or they're just going to see it and they're going to call it like they see it, and they're just going to get pissed and uppity and mad at the players, even though the players may have just saved all of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. So NPCs won't always be the nicest and most positive things, and I think honestly, the last the last takeaway I'm going to add to this for this whole topic is that NPCs are a flavorful and just bizarre bunch of people. NPCs are such an important thing for you as a DM, and sometimes it's going to be hard to get into that because you don't really know where to start. But just remember, like, if you have to go back to books you've read, go back to games you played, and just remember that every single person there is supposed to be a human or whatever creature, supposed to be a
Yep.
sentient creature with its own thoughts and goals, and just think about a little bit about how they're going to feel about this, and
Yeah.
just taking a little bit of time can honestly dramatically improve your character.
Yeah. Just one last thing to add on to, looking
Sure.
back at games and books you've read, but an important source of information is definitely real life. So if your players are going to a library, most likely, if you're listening to this, you've been to a library. What do you expect to find there? There's going to be librarians. There's going to be other patrons. What are people going to be doing there? So it's not as static as your players walk in to the library and everyone's kind of statically just kind of not doing anything. It's like, okay, there's four people standing in the corner but nobody's talking. The librarian is sitting at the desk idly looking forward like their brain is on sleep.
Yeah.
Like, making sure to add stimuluses to the situation, like people arguing over a book, or if there's a heated debate going on about a topic that people are kind of interested in the times. All of these things will definitely prompt the players to want to, when there's conflict, not necessarily sword and board smacking it out.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying here, and that's another good one is that social conflict is just as real and just as important as actual physical combat.
Yep.
And it's a great way to add a little bit of prompt for the players to interact with each other. If you provide a moral dilemma, two people have two different opinions on just some moral dilemma, doesn't matter what it is, whether or not to, kill orc babies. There's a classic orc baby dilemma questioning whether or not orc babies are born evil. That's a whole goofy thing and a half. But if you bring up situations like that, you give the players in character a chance to both explore their own characters and explore the world around them. So,
Yep.
yeah,
Don't be afraid to have conflict between NPCs, because more times than not, that will definitely promote your players to enter the fold
yeah.
again on whatever their conflict.
Okay, so the call is still going a little weird. Gonna have to see if we can figure out some sort of solution to that. But I think we've covered everything pretty well.
I would agree so.
Yeah, so I would like to take a note here to thank Milton, a magical fairy princess. It's the name of the person who suggested this topic. I'd like to hope that Milton found some useful information here. And if anyone else has any ideas for streams they would like us to cover, or if they'd like to join in for one of my GOPD games or something else, don't worry, I'll be making more of those coming down the tube soon enough. Don't be afraid to subscribe here or to go over into the description and check out the Discord where most of this stuff gets hosted from. You can see our announcements. You can, ask anyone questions. There's a lot of useful resources there. So, yeah, with that, I have been your host, Hydra.
And I have been Owlbear.
Yeah, so I hope everyone has a great day and have a good night.